Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. So my name is Aditi Sengupta. I am the president of Xcelerate NC, and I will be serving as the moderator for today's panel discussion on education in the times of the pandemic and the way forward. So briefly, Xcelerate NC is a 501c3 nonprofit co-founded by my brother Anirudh and myself in the summer of 2020. Our mission is to accelerate the growth of young minds and help them excel. So what we will be doing today is discussing the impact of the pandemic on students and educators and what lessons we will be carrying forward from this time. I'd also like to take a moment to thank our technical coordinator, Anirudh Sengupta.
Hi, this is Anirudh. I will be the tech coordinator for this session. Thank you all for coming. Hope you have a great session. Thanks.
Thank you, Anirudh. We've got a very distinguished panel with us here today who will provide their unique perspectives on today's topics. So I'm very honored to introduce our panelists to you. First, from Charlotte, North Carolina, we have Ms. Stacy Levi, the Director of Administrative Services at the Exceptional Children's Program for Charlotte Mecklenburg Schools. She has been working in the field of special education for the past 33 years, though her passion for helping those with disabilities starts long before. Thank you so much for joining us today, Ms. Levi.
For having me.
Next, we have Ms. Reena Naran, an IB educator joining us today from India. She is a computer engineer and found her calling in teaching, and she's written her book titled Turbo Mathematics. She currently teaches senior school students in Pathway School, Noida. So I really appreciate you being here, Ms. Naran.
Thank you for having me, Aditi.
Thank you. Our next panelist is Dr. Mohit Chauhan, an esteemed psychiatrist with 15 years of experience in mood and anxiety disorders. Currently, he's the psychiatry clerkship site director at Mayo Clinic, Florida. He oversees daily student activities, including clinical evaluations, discussions, tutorials, and other educational activities. Today, he is joining us from Jacksonville, Florida. It's a pleasure to have you here, Dr. Chauhan.
Thank you for having me.
Our next panelist, joining us all the way from Tanzania, is Mr. Tim Spooner, the field manager for Help to Kids, an incredible nonprofit organization in Tanzania. This organization runs children's homes, supports primary schools, and other educational projects. We at Xcelerate NC have had the pleasure of collaborating with Mr. Tim Spooner. He has extensive experience working as a senior level executive with some of the world's largest companies. And Mr. Spooner currently manages and provides oversight to the projects on the ground in Tanzania. So thank you for joining us, Mr. Spooner.
My pleasure. Thank you, Aditi.
Next, we have Mr. Sylvester Renner, the co-founder and president of Develop Africa, another amazing nonprofit organization that provides school supplies, scholarships, and other resources for families in need in Africa. He provides strategic leadership and oversight for their projects. He has 22 years of experience in nonprofit organization management and technology consulting. We at Xcelerate NC have also had the pleasure of collaborating with Mr. Renner and Develop Africa for an initiative in Sierra Leone. So today he joins us from Johnson City, Tennessee. We appreciate you being here, Mr. Renner.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And finally, from Indian Land, South Carolina, we have Mr. Paul Buxbazen, a national board certified music educator who has been teaching in public schools for the past 27 years. He is a passionate advocate for music education because of the benefits and the universal lessons it teaches us. Personally, I've been a fortunate student of Mr. Buxbazen's for more than a decade now. So welcome to the panel, Mr. Buxbazen.
Good to be here, and I'm very proud of you and Anirudh doing this. I've taught them since they were kindergartners, and man, you guys are amazing.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate every single one of our panelists being here, and I am excited for today's discussion. So without further ado, let us get started. The first topic I would like to touch on is the impact of the pandemic on student education. Now, we all know that the spread of COVID-19 has forced the education system to adapt in unprecedented ways. According to UNICEF, 188 countries have faced school closures, making our traditional classroom setting unfeasible. So I'd like to hear from everyone how the pandemic has disrupted education in their corner of the world. If I may, I would like to begin with Ms. Nara.
Yeah, we were definitely unprepared for this kind of a pandemic, or even our systems, or, in spite of being an IB school, it definitely had a huge impact. We had to change our whole way of thinking. There was no longer, we were not able to connect with the students one-on-one basis, which the students had very much, looked forward to when in a classroom setting. But COVID-19 also, forced us to think of innovative ways of reaching out to students. And we were lucky enough that our school, the students were equipped with the technology. We are a very technology oriented school. So the movement from the classroom to the laptop settings was kind of smooth. It was not so difficult. The children did connect very easily. We did shift to Microsoft Teams and Zoom for conducting our classes. But initially, yes, there were hiccups, but we did settle down quite fast because of the students being very, very technologically oriented. So they were able to move. But I know that there were many students who struggled in many schools. When I hear stories from other schools in India, I do know that the struggle has been a lot more than what we faced.
Right, so the students were adapting though for your school.
They were adapting, they adapted very fast. And yet at the end of it, we do miss that one-on-one connect. That is sorely missed even now. Students do miss coming to a classroom and sitting with their friends or doing any kind of group work. So all that has taken a toll,
Definitely, I can see all of our panelists are agreeing with that sentiment. I think we all miss being in the classroom with our educators, with our students. Thank you for sharing, Ms. Naran. Mr. Spooner, with students in Tanzania, how has the impact been compared to what we've heard from Ms. Naran?
Well, ours would, I break it into two groups because for the children home, when school closed, we had them 24/7 under our care, and we have our own teachers here. We have internet, laptops, and everything else. So for them, in theory, it was relatively easy compared with others. But we didn't have on site the full complement of teachers. So that was our biggest struggle for the children at the children's home. We had to try and get people in and also co-opt others, including, unfortunately for them, myself, to try and become educators. And I certainly have no qualification in that regard. But the bigger challenge was, as you probably know, that's the children's home, 30 children. On our own campus that's quite well structured, has all the infrastructure and technology. The biggest challenge for us was that our students on our education sponsorship programs and with the government schools that we support, our own daycare centre students, they're unlikely to have electricity, let alone a laptop, let alone internet. So that was not an option at all. And we had to adapt very, very quickly to try and work around that. We created bubbles as best we could of groups of students who live fairly closely together, where one or more of the parents had a smartphone. And we worked with the schools to get the lessons sent over to us because we have internet and communications here, and then had to distribute them onto those smartphones into the bubble groups. We also tried to produce extra material here because I think the schools in Tanzania themselves, they don't have the technology. In order for them to produce the material to send out regularly for the students was a challenge. So we had to produce additional material ourselves and then deliver that to the students. But I think, you know, the biggest challenges for our students, they adapted reasonably well, but obviously they missed some social interaction, but they weren't locked down. They were just not allowed to go to school. It was a very strange situation. So they could go into study groups in their small bubbles and have that social interaction on a smaller level than in school. But many of their parents, as Sylvester will echo and understand, are not particularly well educated themselves. Many of them can't read or write. So the parents stepping up, as might be more likely in a more developed country, to work with teachers and work with the children at home to assist with homeschooling, is not an option. The kids are on their own, and those bubble groups became very important, so that at least they had 6, 7 or 8 other students to try and share difficulties with, resolve and talk through problems to better solve them. But that was our challenge. But we were only locked down for 3 months. We are unique, I think, are we not, Sylvester? I think we're the only country in Africa who claims that COVID never existed. And if you look at a thematic map for Africa, don't you, with the dark red for the highest areas of incidence of cases, there's one grey one on the map which stands for not monitored, didn't exist. So the children have gone back to school after 3 months. So it's a completely different setup.
So, Mr. Spooner, going back to school after you've been in these bubbles or in the children's home where you're not in that classroom setting, was that transition smooth as well, or were children adapting well to that?
I think the children here were certainly, as Rena referred to, really happy to get back into being able to interact with their teachers and particularly a wider group of friends rather than a smaller bubble. The challenges for getting back to school and still keeping safe are, you know, they travel on local transport and that tends to be packed to the rafters. There's no sense of social distancing allowed. No masks, but we provided all of our students with masks regardless, hand sanitation products, and tried to encourage them to wash. But when they got back to school, they were happy with that. But as I alluded to earlier, certainly the Tanzanian education system believes that unless you're studying maths, science in a traditional sense of the word, then you're not getting education. And that if you can do 12 hours in a day, then that's better than doing 8 hours in a day. And if you can go on a Saturday, and as I said, in an order to try and catch up, they've crammed even further. So we have students leaving at 5 in the morning and getting home at 10 at night, Monday to Friday, then still having to do homework with no electricity often. And if they're lucky, with a smartphone as light for studying on Saturday. They've now started to introduce Sunday, and as I said, there's a mini break. Most of the kids have been called into school for the mini break. The summer break has been cancelled. The Christmas break will be cancelled, and they will literally study almost 365 days a year, and that's already proving to be counterproductive, as you would expect. So we're trying to lobby to reduce the hours, but it's counterintuitive to the system here. So that's the biggest challenge they face. And we have a lot of children who are saying, I just can't keep up. There's too many hours. I'm exhausted and nothing's going in. I'm getting further behind rather than catching up. So that's our challenge for them now.
Right. I think recovering from the pandemic is going to be a challenge academically, but the answer doesn't seem to be more hours of school. But thank you, Mr. Renner, or Mr. Spooner, for your insights. Mr. Renner, are you seeing something similar in Sierra Leone? Are the same shifts happening here?
Yes, very much a similar situation is happening there, where with the pandemic, basically they went into lockdown, they closed the schools, and the government was recommending that some classes transition to online learning. But like Tim shared, there needs to be a foundation for online learning to take place. You need to have the technology in terms of laptops. You also need to have, ready supply of electricity, and you also need to have internet access, the things that Tim mentioned. Well, there are many thousands of youths or families in Africa who do not have access to those three items that are the foundation for online learning to take place. So those students who, of course, they basically fell behind because they could not participate in any of the learning. And a few families, of course, who were like in the middle age, who had the access to those, were able to do some self-learning. In Africa, they also, countries like Nigeria, Sierra Leone, they also tried radio broadcasts, which had some limited success because they were able to, at certain hours of the day, they would broadcast lessons depending on the grades or the classes that they were in. But there was definitely a decline in educational quality. Some students ended up just being disillusioned. Like Tim said, the social interaction wasn't there. A lot of learning takes place in groups, and you can always, even if you don't pose the question, if somebody else asks a question, like, oh yes, I know, I want the answer to that question too. So basically they missed out on all of that. And so there was a lot of, people are still feeling disillusioned. They're feeling just like left out, they're dropping out. The other issue, of course, which is related, is as the economy contracted and parents, businesses shut down, they lost jobs, then parents were not able to keep their kids in school. Even when the schools opened back up, they couldn't afford the fees and the books. And so there's been a ripple effect, and, and not to talk about all the mental issues as well. But they're still struggling through this. Schools, of course, are back open, and they're trying to, get back into the full swing of things. But I think we are yet to fully grasp the impact that this has had on the education in terms of lost time. They're trying to cram a lot more into the semester, and it's just not working. So some students are being pushed over to the next year or the next semester, and so there's been a loss in learning. And hopefully globally, and each government will have to stop and think, how can we prepare for this so that the next time this happens to come around, we won't end up in the same situation where we're just being left behind, and there's been a huge loss in education.
I think that's one of the goals of today, to see where we go from here, because as you mentioned, Mr. Renner, this pandemic is pushing us back academically, even more so for students who don't have the technology to be learning virtually. That being said, there are, of course, we're seeing a through line of challenges. So continuing our westward journey, Mr. Buxbazen, you have extensive experience as a music educator, but this year has been completely different from any year before. So what are the challenges that you are now facing because of the pandemic with music education virtually?
Well, first of all, it's an honor to be here, and I just love listening to what the other panelists are saying. And again, I'm just enormously proud of you and Anirudh for doing this. It's been my pleasure to know you since you were little kids, and you were extraordinary then, you're extraordinary now. In music education, it's there have been a whole host of challenges. So yes, we're online. That's challenging. We've gone back in person, which is great, but for a while we weren't allowed to sing because it's considered something of a super spreader risk, which understandable, right? But that's kind of our bread and butter in music education. That's how we get kids to internalize music, by singing. It's the best way. And so, all right, how do we teach music without singing? Well, that's a tough one, but we manage, and we did well during the time and everything. There's a great curriculum that our district has purchased. That's an online curriculum that is very interactive, very fun, very kid-friendly, and that's been amazing. So the kids have gotten music. For me, what I've seen outside just my own classroom is there are some trends developing or maybe coming to blossom that I'm not so wild about. I hear a lot of I hear about a lot of music programs being canceled, and that's a real concern. And like on the one hand, I understand how a person, you know, who is an administrator or whatever, and a non-musician could have a prioritized list of the most important, you know, subjects and kind of default to the traditional academic subjects like, you know, math and science and English and all of those things. And like I understand that. I feel and I felt for a while that there's an underappreciation for the arts and for music. And for people who are not musicians or who don't intuitively sense the intrinsic value of it, I felt that there needs to be a more in-depth articulation of the value of the arts. And I was thinking about how I could explain this a little bit. Anyone here a fan of Mr. Rogers and Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, that TV show? I love Mr. Rogers, great. So he would start off every show kind of introducing the theme as himself. And then this little train would go into the land of make-believe. And that was sort of a metaphor of going into the unconscious. And in the land of make-believe, that main theme was explored through the arts, storytelling, puppetry, song, and it really brought it home. So how successful would his show have been if it never went into that land of make-believe? Not very successful. How many people would it have really touched in a memorable way? Not that many people. And so one of the main values of the arts that I've been kind of exploring and reading a lot about, thinking a lot about, is the ability for the arts to tap into the unconscious, the subconscious mind, the emotions. You know, the arts are amazing. People who associate a certain event with a song, decades later, when they hear that song, it brings back the event and emotionally opens up certain areas that maybe they've wanted to keep down. And it gives them permission to feel and to deal with things. Personally, I actually recently experienced a death in the family. And you don't sort of know what to do exactly when that happens, and it could be difficult. And immediately I went to the piano and I just started playing. And I have this outlet where after I expressed myself, you know, what I was feeling on the piano, man, did I feel better. I felt so much more peace and rest. And I've heard many, many students of mine experience exactly the same thing. During the pandemic, for kids who had music as a way to express themselves, it became a lifeline. And they used it to well, just, you know, they put everything they were feeling into it, and they even reached out to other people. And I have to say, you know, Aditi, your family used music during the pandemic to make other people's lives better. You put out great recordings on YouTube. I highly recommend people look over great recordings and beautiful songs. And these things, they soothe us in that time. And historically, there are all of these examples of music and art decreasing suffering, moments where people understood the value of it. Winston Churchill had a famous quote about World War II. You know, this is what we're fighting for. You know, they asked, should we save the art in the museums? And he said, well, that's exactly what we're fighting for, really, the preservation of culture. These are deeply important expressions of peoples and individuals and groups. And you know, the arts, if the arts, I teach at a STEAM Academy, and I'll wrap up here. I don't want to go too long, but I teach at a STEAM Academy, and it's, you know, science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. And I was so happy to be a part of this new school because the arts are included as one of the main subjects that's really good for kids. And so I was thinking, in what way, like what exactly is the piece of the puzzle the arts has to offer? And so science, technology, engineering, math are absolutely indispensable for describing the quantitative world that we live in. You need to be able to have those tools on a tool belt. But when we talk about explaining the qualitative world, you need the arts. And that's deeply important. And I hope that this pandemic is a moment for everyone to reflect on the main question that's been in my mind: what is the value of the arts, and what is it actually providing for kids other than a fun time? It is fun, but there's something deeper.
Right. I think, yeah, there's a different value to having arts and music education, especially during the pandemic. And I would love to touch on some of the mental health impacts of music as well later when we do get to the mental health portion of today's discussion. But thank you, Mr. V. I think that's a really valuable perspective of what we are changing during this time, with everything changing. Even music and art is being impacted. So thank you. Ms. Levi, you work with exceptional children who require a different set of resources to learn. So in your experience, what are the new obstacles that these children are facing in the program, and what obstacles is the program itself facing right now?
So first of all, let me just explain that in North Carolina, exceptional children, it's defined as students with disabilities, and they vary in their level of disability. We have students that are identified in that they require additional support, and they have mild disabilities. But we have a spectrum of disabilities, and so we also have students that have very, very significant disabilities. I will say one of the joys of working in the United States is that all students are afforded an education, at a public education. And so I spend a lot of years working to make sure students with disabilities have that equal access to good public education. So I say that just to also say I'm very struck by the similarities that I've heard from the other presenters. Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools is considered a large urban school district. And with that, there's diversity. We have socioeconomic diversity, we have ethnic diversity, we have all different types of inequities that showed up front and center when the pandemic hit. That was one of the first things that was noted, were the inequities in our society, in the structure of our society. We had students, like Rena said, that had the technology they needed. They had the internet in their homes. They had the parental support in their homes to continue to be successful in education. But then on the other hand, we had students who, like the other two presenters have mentioned, they absolutely didn't have the internet accessibility, didn't have the parental support, the language of parents, not having the ability to help students with their learning. That was quite detrimental. And I will say our community came together to find ways to solve that. So all of the challenges, forced us all to be the best engineers ever put in position, because we had to analyze the problems. We had to really investigate what possible solutions there were. And then we had to implement them and resolve all the errors that showed up in our thinking. And I say that as a person who works for a district, who works hard for all children, but for students with disabilities, our focus really was, how do we help the most vulnerable students in the district continue at the same access that all students have? I will say, we found issues with all of our groups that had to deal with it. Our administrators, our teachers, our students, our parents, and our society as a whole, because they didn't have access to parents who were doing jobs. So, I mean, it really impacted everyone. We ended up having to really pivot to a lot of online learning platforms. That's costly. Luckily, our federal government provided funding for districts to be able to do that. That's another, opportunity that we had. We had to retrain teachers. We had teachers with varying levels of skill. So we had to train teachers. We had to have some consistency. Just a multitude of challenges that really have shown up as really great opportunities. So
I also, Ms. Leva, if I might ask, how are the children reacting to this, to virtual learning? I understand that children with disabilities, sometimes virtually learning can be especially different for them. And it's a difficult shift for everyone, but for children with disabilities, are they able to learn virtually? Is that something that's, sustainable? How are they reacting to that?
So really, thank you so much for asking that, because here's the truth is, it's different for every individual child. We have students with disabilities who have flourished working in a virtual environment. We have had students who need face-to-face, in-person instruction. So our district has prioritized in-person learning for students who require that. From the very beginning, when the district was was virtual for all students, students with disabilities, their IEP teams made decisions on whether or not that specific student needed in-person learning. And if the team said, yes, that's what they need, then we provided that. I will say some of the most joyous days of this year for me has been in schools, seeing kids in classrooms with their masks on, with their shields around them, but their eyes are smiling. They are happy to be in schools. And teachers have really had a very tough job this year because they're teaching kids virtually and they're teaching kids in person. So, and teachers have been scared for their safety. So it's been complex to say the least, but individual thinking has to occur for students with disabilities and decisions made individually.
Thank you, Ms. Leva. I'm glad to see that some students are flourishing in this time. And I think it's really valuable that, the people who are in person are getting a safe education. I'd like to open up a question. So we're also hearing that there's been an impact on educators, obviously, through this pandemic, and educators have had new challenges. It's a completely different system this year. So I'd like to open it up to the panel, but as educators and, nonprofit organizers, what are you seeing, and as mental health experts as well, what are you seeing as the impact on, beyond the students? Because as we've seen, no matter what we're talking about, it seems to be bigger than just having the students in the classrooms. There's definitely a lot of, cause and effect happening. So I'll open it up to the panel. What are we seeing for, educators, parents? How are they being impacted? Yeah, feel free.
I think everyone has had to learn new ways, even educators. Like we did not know how to teach from a faraway system. We were so used to having kids in front of us, and so used to, as a math teacher, to adapt to an online teaching without being able to write, even if the whiteboard was available on Zoom, not to be able to write without a digital pen and pad. And initially when we had the lockdown, we were not equipped. We were not equipped with all these technological advanced things, and we didn't know how to teach. And especially a subject like math or a science, how do you conduct experiments when the kids are at home? So to be able to virtually show them the experiments it was a huge challenge. We've had to rethink, as I said earlier also, we've had to rethink all our planning. The weekly plans or the unit plans that we had all went for a toss. Because we had project-based learning planned up, we had, all those with real life experiences or tours planned up for them. Everything we just could not do anything out of that. And we had to adapt to a very new system of teaching through videos or teaching through, some virtual learning. As you said, it was difficult for the children. I think it was equally challenging for the educators. As educators, we also found we had to find a way to reach. We had to find a way to connect without being able to connect actually. That
Let
was
me let me add a few things to that. Thank you so much, Reena. I think my experience through this pandemic, apart from as a psychiatrist, has been of that of a parent. So let me bring that perspective in also. I have twin girls who are not identical. They're very different human beings. They're in 5th grade, and they have been doing distance learning this year. And I cannot have more gratitude for a group of people than teachers. They have taken the most risks, perhaps with the least amount of recognition of those risks that they were taking. And adaptability, right? As Ms. Levi pointed out, being able to teach kids in the classroom who were choosing to come in while also trying to teach kids who were at home presented unique challenges. There were disruptions. Children who were coming to school, if they were getting exposed, they're being quarantined. To then adapt to that particular child's need was another challenge that I found our teachers really rose up to those challenges and adapted really, really quickly. As a parent, you had to almost think of each child's unique needs, which makes me wonder, like, so if you're thinking about 2 and finding it challenging, a classroom of 16 or 17, or in case of Tanzania, probably thinking about a classroom of 60 to 80 students at a time, at least, if not more, right? Or hundreds, and adapting to that. I know, without actually having the tools, right? Without having the resources to address it would have been quite a challenge. So as a parent, one child is very structured. Everything has to be just so. Was one challenge. And then the other child, if she could get away without doing something, she'll try to get away without doing those things. And so you had to almost convey different messages in the same household. Looking at neighbors and friends, a child who was a very good student started struggling very early on. And we were putting our heads together as to what's going on without realizing that the problem was with the computer. In one of the, perhaps, if not the one of the richest counties in Florida, in a urban neighborhood with perhaps the highest speed internet available, the kid was struggling and didn't quite realize that he was missing pieces of information because of technological problems. And then, there's contrasting it, what I'm hearing from, Mr. Spooner, in terms of trying to create bubbles 50 miles away where kids are taking a bus to school that is packed to the hilt, sort of gives you a different perspective and different kinds of challenges all over the world that educators and administrators are facing. And hats off to you guys.
Just follow up on one thing. For some students that have flourished in a remote environment, I would say that is really defined by what is appropriate for that child. And what does flourish mean for this child may not be the same for another child. We've had students that have had some behavioral issues that remotely, those behavioral issues don't show up. Mm-hmm. So in that regard, they've been able to focus more on the instruction that's in front of them. So I just wanted to be clear that flourishing really is dependent upon that child. And I agree, parents have found a new respect for teachers, a new respect for their children as learners. They've had to learn what works for their kids and what doesn't. So there's been some huge benefits to this really tough situation.
Sure. I want to echo what Mr. Renner had said earlier. One of the concerns that I have had as a parent, and perhaps educators can jump in and address it, is that in this remote environment, one anxiety I've had is that the kids will not know what they don't know, right? Because when other kids are asking questions, then you suddenly realize that yes, that there is something that I didn't understand. And in a remote environment, I sometimes wonder if it's easy to just kind of go along without recognizing that you've not really understood the material very well. Of course, we have testing and those things, but still there is something to be said about sitting in a group and learning together.
Definitely, that has been an impact on especially children who are scared to speak up in the class for the fear of being laughed at or for the fear of being ridiculed. Those children have had some kind of a loss here, like in the sense that they are in a virtual environment, they kind of get lost in the whole thing. It's very easy for them to hide. And when you are actually, as an educator, I feel that when the students were in the classroom, from their faces a teacher could make out whether they were understanding or not. You can make out from the questions that the children are asking, from the faces, from their expression, from the body language. All that goes missing when it's a virtual environment. So for some students it becomes very easy to hide and to pretend that they're knowing, and while they're not knowing actually. So yeah, you're right that they wouldn't probably know what they don't know. They won't even know what they don't know. So yeah, that is a challenge.
So, and I also want to, sorry, go ahead.
I was
actually going to call upon you to initiate that conversation about music and mental health.
Well, yes, and I wanted to kind of connect to what you were saying. This idea of kids with their kids teaching each other or revealing things that they don't know by the group interaction. It manifests in a very unique way in music. So, I'm a choral teacher, which involves kids singing together all at the same time. Couldn't do that for the longest time, just started that up again. And, one of the things about when everything is taken away, you begin to sort of, you begin to sort of ask the question, well, what's essential? Or what is the value of the thing that I've been doing, and what's maybe extra or superfluous? And so, with kids singing together at the same time, I had to shift to, when we were all remote, individual solo singing. And so in my chorus, I would assign kids solo songs. And I could teach them some vocal technique individually, one at a time. Great. But now that we're back in person, I'll have a group of maybe 6 kids that are in person in my small little chorus class, have them spaced out. We're allowed to sing again with masks, 12 feet apart, all that good stuff. It's a different dynamic. When they hear each other, when they hear their neighbors singing, the way music is set up is that in real time, all of those evaluative things that you were talking about happen in the moment. So if a kid's not a strong singer in a solo setting, they've got the encouragement of the group in a group setting to have their voice be heard to the extent that they're comfortable or confident. I think that happens in math and reading and all of those things, but it's maybe not in real time or as immediate, the feedback and the understanding of what they're missing. And this is more of an intuitive kind of artistic approach to it. But that's such a good point. The idea that they learn from each other, and that's something that's really difficult to replicate in an online situation. But you were talking about, the mental health thing, and it's like that's another disturbing trend. You see a lot of depression has skyrocketed, particularly for teenagers in this time, understandably. Being separate from people. But I know that I've heard from many parents that music has been sort of a life raft for their kid, or lifeline for their kid, where in some regards they've thrived or they've used it. They've come to know music as more than just another subject that they're learning, as a practical outlet of expression and a way to cope and deal. But I was really curious to hear from Dr. Chauhan exactly what he's seen with that problem of the rising depression rates.
Very briefly, because I do want to really go in depth with mental health, because I think educators especially are seeing a lot of trends here. But this idea of group interaction is, I think, really important. And I'd like to quickly throw that question out to Mr. Renner, who brought up group interaction before. How are you seeing students deal with that in Sierra Leone? The group interaction piece, is that happening? Are we adapting? Or is that something that we're still not able to achieve?
I think briefly, students were just, they were just learning home, or they were not learning at all because the schools were shut down. But when the schools and colleges reopened, of course, they're getting back into that, right, into that a learning environment where they can learn in a group setting. And Africa is very much a communal continent where a lot of the learning is centered around group clusters. So, but social distancing, of course, affects that learning, and the learning strength just basically dropped. So, I think it's essential. There's no way to with if you're learning alone all by yourself, it's just you're just going to miss so much. So, and you just can't really capture that, as the other panelists have shared, through an online learning environment. But everybody's shifting back to classes right now. They're back to regular learning, and so hopefully this will be something that stays in the past, and we won't have to go through this in another cycle. So that's what we're all hoping for.
Thank you, Mr. Hunter. So now a deep dive into mental health, which I think is a very different situation during the pandemic, as our panelists have echoed, that we are, as students, but also as educators and parents, this is a completely different system from what we're used to, coupled with this lack of group interaction that we're seeing, and just the general uncertainty of what is happening during this pandemic. It's definitely taken its toll on everyone, not only in the academic sense, but also emotionally, mentally. So first, of course, I'd like to come to Dr. Chauhan. In your observations, what are you seeing as the pandemic's impact on students' mental health?
So, when we think about mental health, and believe it or not, as we have been talking about education, all of us have been pointing out things that directly relate to our mental health, right? So if we have to break it down, we like to break it down into the social aspects of mental health, the psychological aspects, the biological aspects, and spiritual aspects, right? So you combine all of those together, and optimal functioning in all of those domains sort of defines what good mental health is. We have all talked about the social aspects of this, right? So whether we talk about racial and ethnic minorities not having access to resources, or countries that are resource poor not having that ability to adapt to these difficult challenges, or culturally in terms of being a society where that group is important, the community is important, the learning always happens in a community setting, and a loss of that is a major social aspect. For me, personally, what I had not realized till the pandemic happened is the number of children who actually depend on schools for nutrition, right? And that was suddenly these drives to make sure that the kids are getting enough nutrition was everywhere. And that was somewhat of a surprise for me. Then I started looking at, well, how many children get their mental health services from schools? The numbers are shocking. There's a national agency that does annual surveys, and they ask about, if kids are having mental health problems and where they're getting their services. So between 2012 and 2015, 60% of all adolescents who had received mental health services in this country received it at school from the mental health counselors. And about 14% of all children required mental health services. So of all the children, 14% required mental health services, and of those who received mental health services, 60% actually received it from school counselors. So which essentially meant that our school mental health counselors were the first line of evaluation and referral. And immediately we have seen an impact. So outpatient services utilization has dropped. Part of it is dropped because of lack of availability. but part of it is dropped because parents are not able to recognize, they've not been trained to recognize those problems that was being picked up by teachers and mental health counselors in schools. And so the emergency room visits for mental health services for children in our local hospital has gone up by 300% in the past year. The inpatient psychiatry units are full. Children are waiting for days to get a bed when they're in a crisis. So, and that's a huge impact as far as mental illness, recognition, and treatment is concerned. Unfortunately, some of the most serious mental health problems start in late teenage years and early 20s. And so early recognition and treatment is important. So that has been a big impact. But if we don't even think about those serious mental health problems, lack of structure, sometimes, again, sort of thinking of a more difficult situation in some household, school was an escape for children from very difficult situations. And so now they're stuck in that situation. So the incidence of abuse has gone up. So those are the challenges in terms of mental illness. But taking forward the role of music, if we think about age groups, especially the middle school kids and the high school kids, so who are from 6th grade to 12th grade. So middle school kids, what is the developmental phase that they are going through? They are learning competence, right? Am I competent at something or I'm not competent at something? So when they're mastering that piece of music, when they're mastering their vocal cords, it gives them that sense of competence, amongst other things, right? Understanding geometry and algebra and all of those things. But there's something unique about music. There's something unique about being able to regulate your voice or master an instrument that provides that sense of competence. We know that very well, that children who sing or who play music tend to be healthier emotionally. And if we move to sort of children in high school, they are developing a sense of self. They're kind of saying, this is who I am, and this is how I relate to the world. And much of this was happening in the school. So you take that away. I am actually curious as to how this is going to impact their ability to develop who they are as human beings and what will show up years from now, right? We don't have data right now with that regard. And talking of the future, one other concern we have as mental health providers is how many of these children will develop post-traumatic stress disorder. The turmoil of the past year, not just from the pandemic, the fear, the uncertainty, loss, unfortunately, in some cases, losing grandparents, not only losing grandparents because they became ill, losing grandparents because there was no connection with the grandparents. It was not safe to go see grandma and grandpa. In some unfortunate cases, losing a family member and not being able to process it. If you think about it, in all societies, all cultures, grieving is a group process. And if they are not able to grieve, will that increase the chances of post-traumatic stress disorder? I wonder in societies where there is a lot of violence already, how are children going to cope with that? So that is something that we're very concerned about going forward.
Thank you, Dr. Chauhan. I think there's many levels to the mental health discussion, and thank you so much for your insight into this topic. I'd like to also ask Mr. Spooner, so are you seeing these impacts in the children's home? What are some of the mental health impacts you are witnessing firsthand as an educator there?
I think, well, from my experience in Tanzania so far, I think in many ways it's the same, and in many ways it's different. Mr. Renner referenced, which is a different perspective, but there's the sense of community and groups, which is common to this. And I think there's a great African saying that it takes a whole village to raise a child. Yeah. And you take away that interaction, and it's a big part of their education. And as we say, we're talking today about, yes, maths, science, whatever. I'm delighted we're also talking about music and the arts. When Stacey's talked about special needs children and that diversity, the the children here just don't, they lost that sense of diversity. And it's one of the areas that actually is, we want to try and introduce, and we're trying to introduce here is, funny enough, there is no arts in, certainly in Tanzania, and it's very STEM based, and there's no sport. And going back to mental health, I think that's another, we all know the benefits of physical exercise and well-being as well, being able to get out into open space. So it's definitely affected them from that perspective. But again, they're back at school now, so that's probably less in Tanzania. It was a 3-month shutdown, and we definitely, with the children at the children's home, had to work very hard. But luckily, because we have better facilities than the other kids that we don't look after on our own campus, we did arts and crafts, we did music, we did dance. Music and dance in Africa is huge, and so that was an easy one to get them to agree to participate in. So we were able to give them quite a lot of diversity because it's an unusual setting. We've got a big campus with staff on site and technology, but I think a lot of the other children will have missed that. But again, they're back to that. They're back to school. I just wanted to comment on the other one from Mr. Chauhan, and it's not a criticism. Oh, I wish the classes were 80. Oh, I wish the classes were 80. 110 is a small one. And in some of our ones in our projects in Malawi, and some of the schools we partner with, seriously 200 in one class. So you could argue, particularly for our children in the children's home, they got better attention when they weren't in school, because they had 6 teachers and 30 kids. They didn't know what was going on. They didn't have as much attention in all their life. Yeah, I think the mental aspects here, particularly in Tanzania, having been locked down not so long, have been less, definitely been less. But I think the mental aspects, funny enough, will get worse because of this over-insistence that we've referred to before about cramming. They're being told they're behind. You were working 80 hours, now you minimum in school per week, maybe 100, now you've got to do 140, and that's just not healthy. And I think it will send them back, not just educationally in the obvious sense of the word, but mentally and physically. And the other thing, which is also important to your general health and well-being and your mental state, is nourishment. And as Mr. Chauhan said, we face this all the time, and Mr. Renner will know it. Part of our program, in fact, we've got kids here coming in today after school. We provide them with their food and travel allowance, amongst other things. And that's because otherwise they'll leave in the morning with no breakfast. They'll go the whole school day from 6 in the morning, 7 in the morning, through till 10 o'clock at night, with no water, no lunch, no snack. And that was our biggest concern, funny enough. When they stopped going to school and we couldn't get to them, what would they be eating? Would they be eating? And a lot of them weren't. And we noticed when they came back to us that they were significantly lighter and looking worse for wear. And the knock on, we have a health project that covers 1,000 children. And our cases of just basic fungal infections, lower immune systems that lead to other diseases. And also we've had a huge spike in visits to the optician, because as I said to you before, no electricity, and they're studying more and more in the dark with maybe a mobile light or a little light, and now they've all got poor vision in the space of 3 months. So we have, different challenges, I think, but hopefully that helps.
Well, thank you. I think that's definitely a big thing to consider, the fact that in certain socioeconomic areas and regions and in certain countries, students need basic nourishment first before we can, get to the education part of it. As we all know, education doesn't happen if your student isn't healthy. So I think that's a really important thing to consider during the pandemic is with these resources taken away from the students, how are we providing for their most basic needs? Going a little deeper on this idea of how these resources are necessary to keep our students both healthy and happy. Ms. Levi, are you seeing an impact on kids with any disabilities or learning requirements on their mental health, on their mental well-being or their physical well-being?
Just like for all students, absolutely students with disabilities have been impacted. You know, we do focus on educating the whole child. And in North Carolina, there's, you know, every school district must have a mental health plan to address, you know, like was mentioned earlier, those key indicators on, you know, students that are struggling. Absolutely. The impact, I think, on this for kids socially, emotionally, academically will be long lasting. My hope is that we don't overcorrect in a very rote learning manner just to get the content and the skills back to where they need to be. I hope all of the work that's been done in the last, you know, more than a decade about cooperative learning, teaching kids how to get along, how to be not just good learners, but good citizens of their school community, which then will help them be good community members when they are adults. So I do think all of that is critical, and it's important for decision makers to make that balance appropriate. And so that teachers know the balance and that it is okay to help kids process through what we've all been through, because it's been intense for everybody. So I do hope that there is time within the school, because I think it's been clearly identified that schools are a very critical component of a successful society. So, you know, taking a moment to really stop and think about that, I think is important for decision makers at the federal level, state level, district level, school level. You know, our administrators in schools have to give teachers permission and kids permission to, while we're learning skills and academics, we're also paying attention to what makes us all human and helping us get through in a comprehensive manner, the best way possible.
Definitely. I think that's a really valuable thing that we have to remember, that part of school is learning not just, you know, the subjects, but also how we interact in society, I think, on a greater level. And something I'm hearing from every panelist is this idea of overcorrection through cramming and trying to, you know, catch up, which I think is an innate response to whenever we fall behind, this, you know, anxiety about, are we at the right place? Are we learning enough? How are we going to get our students back on track? Mr. Renner, how are you seeing the impact of cramming on the students? How are the students reacting to that cramming? Is that impacting their mental health? I'm sure there are some adverse effects of that.
Yeah, I don't think the students are really happy with that. They're facing a situation right now where they're trying to, it's a shortened semester and they're trying to just overload them. And I think this would, you know, the negative impact of that would be, it's just going to create more stress for them. We're already seeing a spike in mental health issues where students are frustrated, they feel angry, there's pent up emotions. And so there have been instances where, like, there'll be more fights among people just because I don't know what's wrong, but I'm uncomfortable, and they don't really realize that it's like a pressure cooker situation. So it really behooves, it's really necessary for parents and teachers to be aware that that is the pressure that students are going through this time, and to adjust appropriately, be a bit more patient and be a bit more tolerant, understanding. And these are all things that we all are learning in this new normal.
Right. I think adapting to the new normal is the name of the game right now. It's been definitely difficult to adapt. I think mentally for students, for educators, it's a different toll altogether. If I may throw it to Ms. Narang as well, how are you seeing your students react on a mental level? Are they doing well? Are they healthy? How are they doing?
It's a mixed bag, actually. So yeah, there are many students who have reacted negatively to the whole situation, as in there have been cases of depression or visits to the counselor, and but there are, on the other hand, there are students who as we call it, flourished, where their definition of being flourished, that or they are learning better. But yes, cases of this recluse or being alone, not being able to interact, because school is a place, as many of the panelists have already agreed on, that is a place where you don't learn subjects, you also learn how to be a person, how it's a grooming of the whole thing. It's not just about teaching them what is maths and what is science, but it is also about behaving. How are you reacting to different situations when you're in a group, or peer learning or peer assessing, or building relationships, whether it's with friends or with teachers. With that component gone, yes, it has affected a lot of students. There are students who have said, like, we went back to school normal, the classroom teaching in January, although unfortunately we've again had to go back to a virtual learning this week because of the situation in India again being critical. But we had gone back and we could see the happiness in the children. They were uh, maintaining social distances. They were following all the protocols. They were wearing masks. But you could see from their eyes that they were so happy to be back in the environment, they were definitely learning much better since January when they went back to school. You could see that in their, and they were eager to, that enthusiasm in their steps was back. You could see that very, very openly. It was very evident. So yes, and most of the times what happens, I'm just speaking from what I have seen around me, that when the virtual learning is happening, the parents are also working from home most of the times. And with both the parents working, there are times when all three are working in three different rooms, and there is no interaction among them also for hours. So the child is just interacting virtually with people, not with real interactions. The real communications are missing. The pat on the back, or, just the ruffle of the hair, all those small gestures are also missing. I know that as an educator, I was so used to, when I was teaching grade 6 and 7, so used to getting hugs from the children right early in the morning. They would come running and they would hug you. So for a child, that hug was so important, of that age, that physical connect with the teacher, or coming and hugging you, or giving you a high five, or, having a special way of saying hello to you. So all that they could not do virtually. So it has definitely affected them. You can see that, it is very evident.
I think definitely, I think as students also, we're missing that interaction with our teachers where we're there and present with them rather than, seeing them through a screen. It's a different environment and not necessarily better. Just to wrap up this idea of mental health, Personally, I've seen a lot of my peers and myself to stay connected during this time and to, take care of ourselves. We've turned to music as an outlet, as we've mentioned in this conversation, and the arts are, a way of staying connected, a way of expressing ourselves and getting a lot of those impacts that we've been talking about how we interact with others, about how we are human. So I'd like to throw it to Mr. Buxbazen. What are the impacts of music on your students' mental health? Has the pandemic redefined the role of music in their lives?
That's such a great question. I'm still just meditating on that beautiful thing that Mrs. Narang just said. Schooling, education teaches us how to be. That's deep. That's profound. It's so true. And I think about, like, in music particularly, there's this acting out of some of the best things that we hope for anyone in society baked into music. And Dr. Chauhan, the idea psychologically of acting things out is different than mentally having a concept, and it's more meaningful. And so baked into music, you've got this beautiful cooperative dynamic where everyone is trying to create something beautiful as an end product. And in that process, they are listening. They are valuing others' contributions. They are trying to blend and support and come out and be prominent when it's appropriate. And there's this just beautiful balance built into music in real time, a cooperative dynamic that if society could be like that all the time, the world would be a better place. And that's literally what beauty is. Beauty is this kind of idealized concept of what something could be. When we're captivated by a beautiful painting, it's something of the ultimate version of whatever it's representing. Even abstract things are beautiful in a different way, and they get us to think about deconstructing things. And so this idea of subjects that teach beauty or that are steeped in beauty, the importance of that, it's like there's a built-in roadmap in any of those things in the arts for creating a better world. And so I really love what you said there, Mrs. Naran. That was great.
Thank you. So I think the mental health discussion is very nuanced. There's a lot of levels to how, this new isolation and these new methods of learning are impacting students, educators, parents. I don't think the pandemic has left anyone, spared anyone in this process. I think everybody's been impacted in some negative ways, definitely. We're definitely experiencing loss and grieving, and it's a lot of really severe feelings, I think, that students are going through. But while it is
before
sure.
you finish, Aditi, I always like to, when we are underlying certain discussions, I like to make them positive. True that there are a lot of challenges, but as Ms. Levi pointed out, there is a group of children who have really thrived, right? That suddenly they realized that the group environment was not for them. And that's not just for kids. We are also seeing adults, right? In most big organizations, they're realizing that the productivity has actually gone up, not gone down. So there is a group of kids. I think there will be a need to learn from this, that not one size fits all, right? So perhaps one positive outcome of this forced experiment, right, a worldwide experiment, is that we'll figure out how we can adapt our systems so that they fit individuals better. And I know I say this, but of course this will require a lot of resources. Mr. Spooner is probably thinking, what is he talking about? We are barely able to keep them alive and get them some basic education. But the thought that I had as I was listening to the fact that there's a classroom of 200 children, another positive idea, and this is for all the educators and administrators, I'd like to hear from you. This just popped in my head as I was listening to all of you guys. So you're doing all of this virtually, right? Here we are sitting here having this discussion that we would have never had if we did not have the technology that we have, right? And we are creating almost a resource through this discussion that will live on, right? That will be available to whoever wants to make use of this discussion. So if our teachers are putting in so much effort in creating new lesson plans virtually, aren't we creating a resource that we can share with Mr. Renner and Mr. Spooner, and suddenly students will have access to more teachers, more material? Just a thought, and love to hear from all of you about that.
Dr. Chauhan, you completely read my mind. This is exactly where I wanted to take the conversation next, that while it's undeniable that the pandemic has burdened our education system, we've seen some new and innovative ways of teaching that are allowing us to connect with students on a greater scale. And Like Mr. Redder had mentioned previously, that some students are learning through radio lessons, or I know that in Tanzania, sometimes lessons are aired on the television. In North Carolina, we're seeing, cable companies install internet for children who don't have them in their homes, or outfit buses with Wi-Fi so parents can drive up to the buses and kids can complete online learning that way. So while there is definitely a negative impact, we're seeing a growth in resources and in innovation. So I'd like to open this up to all panelists. What are some of the new and innovative ways of teaching that we're going to carry forward that have had a positive impact on our students? If we'd like to start with Mr. Spooner.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I'm going to start this positive bit with a negative bit, which is that there's a great saying, if history teaches us anything, it teaches us nothing. Yeah, we have a history as human beings of doing what Einstein said, the definition of crazy. They're doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. We've been through lots of these things before. The positive for me that should come out of this, but I fear it might not, but I truly, truly, passionately hope it is, and we've heard it laced in every single aspect, whether we were talking about mental health or just general dynamics about education. Mr. Chairman's got twin daughters who are totally different. I had 4 boys from the same parent, totally different. The world is a diverse place and we should celebrate individuals. And that's what I want to come out of this learning, is that rather than narrowing the focus, as has been happening for many years now in education, and it's not to say that mathematics and biology and physics and all those great subjects are not important. They are, and they always will be. But there's been a narrowing away from individuality, from the arts, and I would also see physical education. And so I'd like to see us learn from this, that actually there's so many individuals, and it is a difficult job as a teacher, I can imagine, because I always remember when I went through school, if I can reference that, and my father died suddenly, unexpectedly, when I was 10. But I was therefore a very independent child, and the school system couldn't cope with me, because the school system said, when you're in my hands from the age of 11, 12, you don't even know how to get from one classroom to another. Whereas I would cook, clean, wash, work at the weekends and do those things. And I really had a tough thing, because they couldn't adapt to the individuals. Now I accept the challenge. You know, when you've got millions, in fact, around the world, billions of children to teach, it's very difficult to create a one-on-one system that recognizes that diversity and still do it. I mean, how can a teacher cope with 30 kids but have an individual curriculum for them? You know, there are obvious challenge, but I think we should go back to more diversity, recognizing that we need to stop educating the creativity out of our children. And that's, online learning, we've learned some of that stuff. When we go back to the classroom, doesn't mean that you should now stop. Oh, we don't need any online. I'm sure there's some stuff in that can be blended and integrated. Some of the learning of the importance of music for mental health. Remember it, bring it, and rather than defund those programs, maybe expand them a bit, and so on and so forth. Sport. So, that's what I hope we take forward from it. That we have to try better to cope with individuals in whatever way that is. Because it's nonsense. You just got to look on the screen at the panel. To assume that everybody is the same and we all want to be a mathematician or an accountant or a football player or that, but and assuming that if you give something to someone for free, they will value it. Well, if you don't like football and someone gives you tickets to the next football match, it's of little value or interest to you, and we need to accept and try and find ways. And I think technology will help a bit if we use it wisely, to be able to efficiently provide a bit more variety and individual tailored tutoring and guidance for our children moving forward.
Thank you, and I hope that's something that benefits students, this idea that using technology, maybe we can cater to their needs a little more specifically and, you know, benefit them. I believe, Ms. Levi, you would have a similar opinion on this, the idea that we can use technology to help certain students cater to their needs a bit better?
Absolutely. And I just want to say, Mr. Spooner, you are speaking my love language by talking about individualization. That would eliminate the need for special education if that was done for all. So I will thank you for that. But I will also say, absolutely, technology has had a role in education prior to the pandemic. It will have a role moving forward. I just hope that there's balance in the role and not an over dependence on it that's been required at this point. But it serves huge purposes for students to pre-learn content so when they come into a classroom, they're ready to have good discussions with their classmates. There's excellent opportunity to strengthen skills through technology. There's skills for homework that can be worked on in an individualized basis. I think technology should be used to really focus on what that individual student needs, to be prepared, to be an active and engaged and enjoy the learning experience that they come to while they're at school, so that they can really appreciate that love of learning. Because learning, when you learn math, you learn logic. When you learn reading, you're learning logic. When you learn music, you're learning logic. So I just think that that is still the beauty that happens in a classroom, and technology can support it.
Thank you, Ms. Levi. Right, the idea of using the technology that maybe we've gotten more used to or adapted to during this pandemic, moving forward, maybe not an over-dependence, but, you know, a measured utilization of the skills that we have, the tools in our tool belt. So if I could next throw this question to Mr. Brenner, what are the impacts that you're seeing in Sierra Leone that you would like to see continue? What are some of the things that have come out of this pandemic that maybe going forward would help supplement students' education?
A great question. I think as we go forward, there needs to be more emphasis on, you know, more availability of technology, more e-learning opportunities. I mean, even though, you know, our students are back in classroom, I mean, they can get the group interaction and all the other benefits of in-class learning. But as the other panelists have pointed out, there's certain things which, you know, there are students who would benefit maybe more from e-learning or individual learning on their own. And there's so many other ways in which online learning, having access to online resources, can complement what was just going on only in the classroom. So I think it would be wonderful if globally we could figure out that teachers are creating all these additional classes that they've created during the pandemic, where these are available, where students can, I know there are many websites where you can go and take courses from different colleges and universities, but it would be wonderful if all these resources that have been created are available to people to learn globally. There's more and more of that. And I think that would be a huge thing for students, where they would have access to these resources and they wouldn't be limited, you know, with the access to the technology or the internet access. And I think we would end up being, so the students who benefit or thrive in a classroom environment, they would thrive. The ones who would thrive in an individual environment, there are additional components they can pick up on their own. I think it will help us all become better, and learning would be enhanced.
Thank you, Mr. Renner. I think that's a sentiment that is echoed by the panel today, this idea of using technology to individualize for those who need it, giving a classroom environment to those who do better there. If I could also ask Ms. Nang, I understand that, you know, having the whiteboard and the digital pen might not be your go-to way of teaching math. But is there anything from the pandemic that you might carry forward and continue to do as we and when we come out of the pandemic?
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway is the tools, is the realization that there are tools available to individualize, as other panelists are saying, to individualize the teaching, whether it is the discovery of a flip grid, whether it is the discovery of new ways of testing, assessments, everything has, changed. So to take it forward, that a child who is, not comfortable with a pen and paper test, you have realized that there are ways to test. There are different ways to assess, not just the pen and the standard pen and paper test. So I think the most important thing to carry forward from this whole pandemic and the thing is to carry forward some very, very important tools that we can use in future. And maybe is it e-learning or assessments or some, what the way we are doing video lecturing or, all the screencasting. There are teachers who are screencasting their lectures and sending to teach the students to learn at their own pace. A student who's not able to cope up at the pace of the whole class can do so at home using, the same, the screencast sent by the teacher. So I think the most important thing to carry forward would be these discovery of these tools and to use them intelligently, as, not to use them blindly for all, like one size fits all, as we've agreed. That is not going to work. And we did realize it earlier also, but probably in a classroom environment, we found it difficult to implement. But I think pandemic has taught us to implement it and to reach out to kids with varying needs in various ways. There's no one way of reaching out. So that I feel is the biggest takeaway.
Thank you, Ms. Narg. I think, yeah, that's definitely something that we're going to strive for in the future, this idea of utilizing technology where we can. I think one of the things I would say is the ability to pause your teacher and rewind and listen to them again is something that's very valuable that I think is happening over technology. I know that a lot of my peers and myself, if we're able to watch the same lecture a few times and really ingrain that information, it's definitely something that has been an unintentional benefit of having virtual learning. So tools like these we should and hopefully will carry forward. I'd also like to come to Mr. Buxbazen. As we've mentioned, having choral education over this virtual environment is next to impossible because we can't get kids to sing together. But have you found tools like the other educators that you might want to use going forward?
Yeah, there's, like everyone has said, these are great answers. Like everyone who, has said, there are things that we've learned through this that are definitely keepers that we want to implement going forward. Just as this whole conversation's been going on, in this portion, I've been visualizing this idea of architecture. So like if you go to a beach, houses are constructed differently there because they know that certain weather phenomena are going to come that are very, very different and very robust, and the houses need to be constructed differently to weather the storm. Well, this is sort of a natural disaster that has hit in education, and so if we're thinking of education almost like a structure, and different aspects, like in a beach house, you've got those pillars that are raised up in case the waters come high. There are all of these different extra bracing things on the inside, so the structure remains sound. And that's because after stress testing, they realize these are the things that will help it hold up. That's sort of, in metaphor, the conversation that we're having that people need to have a lot more. What things failed under stress? What things have we provided that have strengthened? What things are innovations going forward that we definitely want to keep? And what things were present before that are, just good old-fashioned, reliable common sense and will endure, but maybe need fortification? And it's a very, it's a very high-resolution conversation that's very technical and has all sorts of branches off of it for every different subject, because The kids need all of these different subjects. They need to study them to really understand how the world works and be equipped with tools, not just cognitively, but emotionally and artistically and creatively and all of that. So it's, I probably have more questions than answers, but these are the things that are popping to my mind right now.
Thank you, Dr. Chauhan. I hope this answered that previous question about some of the lasting impacts.
It does. And I would like to add from a mental health perspective, I think the biggest takeaway for me has been that, as Ms. Levi said, schools are more than just education, right? That they are a source of nutrition, that they are a source of almost screening for health problems, right? And I do think that we have not really been able to we have built tools for the education part because that's the core objective. Nutrition, I think, is a focus for everyone. I do feel that we have not built the technological tools to do population screening, as in screening the kids for what emotional problems they're having, and then finding the technological tools to connect them with their counselors for those who are having more serious problems, so that the identification and intervention that was happening earlier can continue to happen. So I think that is something that educators and policymakers have to give a little more careful thought to. And I guess we are all talking about the same thing, that one aspect is how can we use technology to provide education to the masses, to the population, and then sort of rise up on that pyramid and gradually individualize it to adapt it to each individual kid's needs so that they can flourish.
Thank you, Dr. Chauhan. I think, yeah, that's basically, I think, what we've discovered today is that there was a level of individualization that wasn't occurring before, and now we are learning some of the resources to do so. I do want to say I am really enjoying this discussion, but it is 11 o'clock. Are our panelists comfortable with staying on for a few more minutes?
Sure, yeah, I'm good.
Incredible. So I do want to open up the discussion a bit and discuss some of the topics that we've talked about throughout the discussion. If any of the panelists have any comments or questions for each other at this time, I'd like to open it up.
I have a question for you, Aditi. Is that okay?
Sure.
What could you tell everyone the work that you guys do? It's pretty remarkable. I happen to know what it is, and why you decided to do that in the summer of 2020.
Sure. So as I had mentioned, Xcelerate NC is the 501c3 that I run with my brother, Anirudh, who we saw earlier today. And some of the work that we do is, what we discovered is when we first went into lockdown here in North Carolina in spring of last year, students were having a hard time connecting like they used to, as we've talked about in today's panel, that element of, you know, group interaction and social interaction was really missing. And it was very easy to become disillusioned, I think, for a lot of students with what was being taught. And we wanted to provide something engaging, something that would keep students learning, but at the same time keep their attention and, you know, be something that was enjoyable. So in the summer of 2020, my brother and I conducted a summer camp for, you know, K through 5 students, and we specifically taught 2 skills that I think are very valuable, which are math and public speaking. My brother is very passionate about math. He's been, you know, competing since kindergarten, and he really wanted to, you know, spread that useful skill because not everybody likes math as much as he does. And on the other hand, I personally believe public speaking is one of our most essential skills that we don't always learn. I think starting younger, teaching public speaking is very valuable because it allows you to advocate for yourself and, you know, have these discussions and have dialogue with others. So we wanted to teach younger students, help them stay engaged in that summer. And we enjoyed it so much that it just expanded. We did a second summer camp. We've done some public speaking workshops. We've had the privilege of working with both Helped Kids in Developed Africa to do lessons with children in Tanzania and Sierra Leone. and hopefully we will continue to expand that. But yes, this project, this initiative as it started, has become a nonprofit that we are using to connect kids during the pandemic. And it's been an incredible experience. So thank you, Mr. Buxbazen.
Well, if there's a bright spot in this otherwise dark pandemic, that certainly is one. Great job, guys.
Great job.
Please add what you've done with your proceeds.
Yes, so for first, I'd definitely like to come to the Exceptional Children's Program at Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools. We did do a fundraiser in December of 2020 with a math workshop and competition, going down the math competitions that we enjoyed so much as kids, as younger kids. We decided to do a competition, charge a minimal fee, and with that, we were able to raise some funds towards the Exceptional Children's Program because they were going back into the classroom and they required those resources because, as we've pointed out, as Ms. Levi mentioned, some of the students need to be present in the classroom. So with the hopes of giving some minimal amount of help to make that transition smoother, we raised some funds for the Exceptional Children's Program. And our classes are always free because we believe that education, there should not be barriers to it. We believe in education without borders, without barriers. So we don't charge for the classes themselves, but we did in the summer of 2020 encourage parents to contribute towards other causes, such as we partnered with an organization that raises awareness regarding breast cancer, which is a cause very near and dear to our hearts. So we're trying to help the students first and foremost, but if we are able to help our greater community with that, that's always, an added benefit. So we do try to do that with our proceeds.
And I'll just point out that because of their work, we were able to purchase some sensory materials to help students regulate their emotions. So we appreciate that.
Well, that's incredible to hear. I am so proud that we are having that impact. It's incredibly humbling. Thank you. And with that,
yeah,
sure.
I will just echo, just like Mr. Buxbazen, I have seen Aditi grow up from a young child. I'm so incredibly proud, and I'm thankful for everybody here who she's connecting with and continuing to become a servant leader, truly, in all ways and forms. So incredibly proud of you. And thank you for connecting us all together.
I would like to echo that. So proud of this, Aditi, the work that you're doing, Aditi. And I hope you continue. Any kind of support you need from my end, I'm always there.
Thank you. I appreciate every single person on this panel. I think you are all doing such incredible work that it has really been an inspiration for me. As you were mentioning, a lot of the panelists have worked with me in the past, with Xcelerate in the past, and a lot of you have seen me grow up. So I definitely draw inspiration from those around me. And if I am doing any good, if I am able to impact people positively, it's because of people like our panelists who have joined us today, to be here and have these discussions with us. So I thank every one of you. And at this time, I'd like to open up for closing comments on the discussion and anything we'd like to say wrapping up. Let's head to Mr. Spooner.
Yeah, I think I'd just like to re-echo the points before. There's always stuff to be learned, but we can use the technology, pick the best bits, but generally try and use new techniques to diversify rather than contract in the way that we have before. There's a myriad of cases in recent history of individuals who have unique skills and have given unique benefit in one way or another or pleasure to the world who didn't fit in a normal box. There was a great story I heard the other day. which talks about children and understanding, you know, that they're different and how to recognize that. And there was a teacher that had a young girl student who never paid attention, was always disruptive. And in the art lesson, she suddenly realized that this girl was focusing intently on what she was doing. And so she was intrigued, and she walked over to her and she said, oh, what are you doing? And the girl said, I'm drawing a picture of God. And the teacher said, but no one knows what he looks like. And without thinking, the little girl said, they will in a minute. Because, you know, kids they're all different. They have certain skills, and it's for us to try and adapt and recognize those and encourage them. And the other thing that's great about kids is they're not afraid to fail. You know, if they don't know the answer, when they're really young, they will try. They'll make something up. They're not scared. And that's why I meant about educating the creativity out of children, I think, as they grow up, is that they are told that they have to fit a certain standard. They're told that failure, in its general sense, is the worst possible thing. Whereas I think we all know that failure is the most important mechanism for learning. And if you're not prepared to fail, you know, it's not the same as creativity, but if you're not prepared to fail, you'll never have an original idea. You know, whether it's in music, sport, maths, science, whatever it is. And then we should also take that, because I think we set children up to then repeat that and cause trouble in later life. And they all try and go, well, I better be an accountant then, or I better be a doctor. That's a proper job, isn't it? There's a label for that. And so you know, if we can encourage them to be more diverse and creative and more confident, and as you said, you know, some of the public speaking stuff that you do, I think is a good example. You know, our kids come out of school and you ask them a question, or say, go and present in their first job. Oh, no, I can't, you know, I couldn't possibly do it. And they shrink. If we can teach them that when they get out into the workplace, they'll find they're much more likely to find what it is they're good at. They'll be happier. Unfortunately, we'll put Mr. Chowan out of business, because there'll be less people having breakdowns because they're in the dead-end lives and careers. But I'm sure you'll always have a job. But
that will be a good problem to have, though.
Exactly. And guess what? They will contribute more to society, both as children and then in the work life, if they're happy and doing what they need to. So that's, you know, that's what I'm kind of hoping for. We try and do our little piece of that to improve things in Africa. And yeah, and I'm inspired by the panelists here today that in their own ways, which is what's the important thing, are trying to give something different that is a benefit to children as they develop and grow.
Thank you, Mr. Spooner. And I'd like to say that seeing the work that Help to Kids is doing in Tanzania and Malawi, and, you know, meeting the children there was an incredible experience. And it's incredible what your organization is providing to them, and I thank you for that. And thank you for your insightful comment there as well about the idea of, you know, bringing creativity back to the classroom. Hopefully the pandemic has highlighted the importance of, you know, expressing ourselves. As you mentioned, public speaking is one of the outlets that I've chosen to express my inner thoughts, which I think is going to be a valuable lesson for kids going forward. And I think music is the other outlet that I have explored and a lot of students have looked into. So Mr. Buxbazen, if you have a closing comment on the topics discussed here today.
Yeah, it's just, it's so beautiful to hear what people are saying, and that, you know, it's, you know, education is like this multifaceted diamond, and all of these perspectives are needed to really make this thing work. And, you know, this idea of inspiration, I would underscore that because I really feel like the heart of leadership is inspiration, getting people to do things in a better way voluntarily, not coercively. That's different. And so when, you know, someone like you, who is still in school, young, does something courageous, brilliant, creative like this, I feel like there's a beautiful ripple effect that's going to happen where other kids begin thinking beyond what limitations have been put on them, or maybe self-imposed limitations. Like, why not, right? And I think it was I think the guy's name, the guy who broke the 4-minute mile, was Bannister, I believe. And you know, it was thought it was unheard of to do that. No one thought it could be done. And then within a year, like a dozen or so other people broke it because it changed the mindset. It was an inspirational act, what he did, saying that the limitations we previously thought were in place are not actually. That's big. That's really, really big. And I feel like there have been a lot of people who have stepped up inspirationally during this pandemic time. That's a very, very bright spot. And I think it could really, you know, like I said, ripple effect in a big way.
Right, I think that's such a valuable idea that just like Roger Bannister, we're proving that limitations only exist if we put them there. And if we refuse to, you know, sit back and let that limitation guide us and control us, there is a lot of good we can do. And I think, Mr. Buxbazen, as a music educator, there's a lot of wonderful things that you are doing for students, and we so appreciate it. And providing music to us as an outlet has been an incredible experience for myself, and I'm sure many of my peers. So thank you so much.
An honor.
Now I'd like to focus on this idea of, you know, what is the bright spot going forward, and ask Ms. Levi for any closing comments on the topic of discussion.
Sure. For me, I think the main thing to focus on is resilience and the art and action that resilience does provide to make things better, to put things in perspective, not to focus on the negative, but to see the positive of what can happen. So for me, it's really focusing on resilience and hope for better outcomes from a bad situation.
Definitely, and that's a valuable thing, hope, that we are in the middle of the pandemic. In some places, we have not gotten out of lockdown, but we hope that from here, we've learned things that we will be using going forward for education, and that we're able to provide to students wherever they are, however they learn. Mr. Renner, if you have a closing thought here on this topic.
I think there's a quote I ran across many years ago, which says limits exist only in the mind. So the pandemic has taught us so much that what we thought was we could never have it, everything had to be this way. The pandemic forced us to think otherwise. Colleges are having exams over Zoom, which was unheard of because we always felt exams, you need to be in the same room to have an exam. So this is what we need to keep in mind, that, you know, a lot of things are going to continue to change. And I want to just take a minute to commend you, Aditi and Anirudh, for the phenomenal work you're doing. You're true role models, and we're so excited to see what the future has in store for you and what you're going to become. Thank you for being awesome. And a special thank you to all the panelists. I've learned so much from listening to you and being part of this. Thank you also for the amazing work that you're doing.
And we thank you, Mr. Renner. I've, you know, had the privilege of working with Mr. Renner for the past few months through Develop Africa, and the work that Mr. Renner is doing to provide for students and families in Sierra Leone and other parts of Africa is going to help them come into a brighter future. And I think that's invaluable. So thank you for being here, Mr. Renner. We really appreciate it. And now I'd like to move to Dr. Chauhan. As you know, you've provided the perspective of a mental health expert and a parent in this pandemic, and I would love to hear your thoughts on this discussion.
So, you know, we have talked about various challenges, but my closing thought is that if we step away, we will see that children, educators, parents, societies as a whole um, have been tremendously resilient and adaptable, right? So that perhaps is something to recognize. The second part, purely from an educational perspective, is, if you think about the way schools are right now, that's a new phenomena in human history, right? That is not how we used to learn. It followed industrialization, that we then start to be put as cogs of a machine, right? We had to be trained to get up at a certain time, work certain hours in a certain order, because that fit very well with the industrialization that was happening. However, schools have taken on roles more than just education and more than just training, as we have talked about, the arts, the mental health piece, the nutrition piece, being those essential social tools. So they will always be there. But hopefully the lesson learned from this pandemic is that we can use technology to expand the scope of schooling, to adapt to individual needs, and hopefully come up with a better blended system.
Thank you, Dr. Chauhan. I think that's been the takeaway from the pandemic, that there are more resources out there than we know, and it's time to start using our tools in our tool belt. And I thank you for being here, Dr. Chauhan. I think as a mental health expert and providing that perspective is so invaluable to the impacts of the pandemic. And I really appreciate your thoughts. Thank you so much. And finally, I'd like to come to Ms. Narang. As an educator, what are your final thoughts on this topic of discussion?
Well, the pandemic has taught us a very great lesson, that is to look for the silver lining in every dark cloud. So I give my students, at least, I give the example of my own experience during the lockdown. The book that you talked about in the beginning that I have written, I had been planning to write this book for the last 6 years. It was there in my mind, but I had not come down to writing it, actually, putting it on the laptop and getting a publisher to publish it. But the pandemic, I saw it in it an opportunity, because I had some time on my hand where I was alone and I could do it. So I always tell the children that turn your loneliness into solitude. There are two words meaning almost the same, that you're alone. But if you turn your loneliness into solitude, you will achieve a lot of things. So don't look at it. Don't look at only the dark side. Look at what can you achieve? What opportunities is this new normal providing you with? So take that forward, learn from that, and achieve success in that. Because although the pandemic has locked you down, but it has not locked your brains, it has not locked your imagination. That is still wide open. So use it to the max and achieve results. So I would suggest that to everyone. Use it for that small silver lining.
I think that's such a valuable takeaway, that even though we're facing obstacles, we are here at home, and for a lot of us, we are not outside. We still have something that can't be taken away, which is our brains, our thoughts. And if we have those, there is not, as we were discussing, a limit to our achievement. So I appreciate everybody's thoughts in this discussion today. I think for the audience, I've learned a lot. I hope everybody in the audience also has some takeaways. And I think this dialogue has been incredible. I thank each and every one of our panelists at this time for being here, spending these few hours with us, and having this incredible discussion and this dialogue. So thank you to everyone who has attended with us today. I will hope to see everyone again soon, and we hope to see more benefits of the pandemic and more silver linings as we move forward. This has been an incredibly enriching conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Aditi.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have
Bye.
a good rest
Bye,
of the weekend.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.